What's up, everybody? Trinity the Gamer 333 here today, and I'm going to be bringing you the next video in the Avengers Endgame series of videos. And this is going to be episode 2.5, How to Prepare for Endgame. So basically today, we're going to talk about the movies you need to watch and why each of them is important, and a quick little summary of each, and also to understand that every single movie in the MCU is important because of the emotional. If you want to have a good emotional experience at the Avengers Endgame event, then you need to watch all of them. So, the very first is Phase 1, and the very first movie within Phase 1 is none other than Iron Man. Now, in Iron Man, we see and are introduced to Tony Stark, and he eventually, becomes Iron Man, and he shows us, how a superhero movie is meant to be established, and I think it was really one of the greatest first superhero movies of all time. Especially developing a universe and everything. Now, obviously there was superhero movies before this, but Iron Man really blew it away into what would eventually become the MCU. As we see at the end, he's recruited by Nick Fury, and it really starts to develop Iron Man's character overall. Then the next in the MCU phase is going to be the Incredible Hulk. Now, this obviously is Edward Norton's The Incredible Hulk and not Mark Ruffalo, but still it's important as it establishes who the Hulk is and how he acts, and how it kind of gives us a little bit of an emotional attachment to the Hulk if we're a fan of the character, and it establishes the MCU lore even more by showing Tony Stark show up at the end to ask General Ross basically where to find the Hulk in a way. And that's where it starts to do the world building and how the MCU is this huge connected franchise overall. Then after the Hulk is going to be Iron Man 2. Now, Iron Man 2 established a little bit more in-depth character for Tony Stark, but it really started to establish his relationship with Pepper Potts and how they've acted together and everything like that, and how important they are. Together, but it gives us a little bit of an emotional attachment to both of them as well, and it shows us also James Rhodey, and I know he was in the first movie but played by a different character, but we're also introduced to War Machine, and War Machine obviously is now a member of the MCU, or of the Avengers I should say, so he's really important too, so it introduces us to that. Now the next movie, Thor, is really where we start to expand things. Thor brought to the MCU something that the other first three movies didn't. It brought us outside of Earth and brought us so far past and made us really see how big the MCU truly was, and by bringing in gods and all this stuff. And obviously it brought us our very first villain in Loki. And Loki obviously became a very pivotal villain within the MCU over the past 11 years so far. And so Thor, and obviously we're introduced to Thor as well in his character and how he has become a pivotal character and part of the Avengers. Then we go to probably one of the biggest ones, Captain America, the First Avenger. Now this one obviously is a big movie because it establishes Captain America, who has become one of the two biggest faces of the MCU. Him and Iron Man are probably the two biggest faces of the MCU currently. And he established, it's called the First Avenger, and it shows how he became the first super soldier, his backstory and all that. And we actually really got emotionally attached to the character and really started to come to enjoy his character and who he is. And he's a huge part of the MCU. Also, I forgot to mention, in Iron Man 2, we saw the introduction of Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow, and in Thor, we saw the introduction of Hawkeye. And now at the final part of Phase 1, we have the Avengers. Now, the Avengers was the very first movie where all our heroes finally came together, and we got to establish and see what they were about, and they faced off against Loki, and then of the Avengers, obviously, teased Endgame in a way. It showed us who the big bad was. It showed us Loki was not the biggest threat out there, and that Thanos overall was the one controlling all of the all the events happening in the MCU. It introduced us to a little bit more into the lore overall and how big the universe is, and it really established the Avengers team overall as well. So then we get into Phase 2, and in Phase 2 we start with Iron Man 3. Now, Iron Man 3, I believe, is extremely important because it starts to develop this characteristic in Tony where he's starting to fear and he doesn't understand, and he even talks about it in Infinity War, how Thanos has been inside his head ever since New York, and he doesn't understand it, and he's been trying to figure out how to stop everything and how to, everything to do, and it's really starting to eat away, and it's starting to help develop his character and us to appreciate his character for who he is as well. And we also are introduced to the Hall of Armors as well, and that's pretty cool. Then we go to Thor: The Dark World. Now, I'd say this one is more important for the sheer fact that it introduces an Infinity Stone in the Reality Stone more than anything else. I was not a big fan of it, but it dives deeper into Thor's character overall and Loki's as well. But not very much. Captain America: The Winter Soldier is the next one. Now, this is a pretty pivotal one, as we see Hydra reintroduced and infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., and we get to meet Bucky and aka the Winter Soldier, and how him and Steve have had that past relationship where they were basically best friends whenever they were growing up. And this is important because it shows that there is more to the MCU than we realize, and more in the past than we realize. Then we go to Guardians of the Galaxy, which expands the universe even more, as we are literally out in space constantly. And we're introduced to Star-Lord, aka Peter Quill, and we find out about the Power Stone, and we really find out who the Guardians are, and we start to grow to love each of the characters, from Gamora to Drax to Rocket to Groot and Star-Lord, and everybody. And it starts to also establish more about Thanos as well, and how Gamora's his daughter, and adopted daughter, and Nebula as well. And then we finally get to Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, this was an okay one. Now, I will say that this one was really important in the fact that it introduced the Mind Stone as well, and Vision, who would become a pivotal character along with Scarlet Witch, and it also introduced Quicksilver, but he died, unfortunately. But in Age of Ultron, we see our characters finally starting to develop a good relationship, and Ultron is bent on tearing them apart, essentially, and it shows how kind of, I guess, fragile the whole relationship can be, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So, it really starts to give us a more emotional connection overall. Then we are in the final phase of Phase 2, final part of Phase 2, we have the Ant-Man. So obviously this introduced us to Scott Lang and the Ant-Man, and obviously Hank Pym, was the one who developed the Ant-Man suit, and it introduced us to the Quantum Realm at the end of the movie, which obviously is a big pivotal point in Endgame, I believe. And it's gonna have to do with time travel and all that stuff, so that's a huge one. So then we go into Phase 3. Oh, and we also learn about Scott Lang's daughter, and we start to become attached to that father-daughter relationship that they have, and how strong it is. So that's another emotional connection. Then we get to Phase 3. This is where things really start to take off. Captain America: Civil War. We are torn between two sides and trying to decide what is going to be the best for our heroes overall, whether it's on Cap's side or Iron Man's side, with the Superhero Registration Act, and understanding that we're a little bit torn when it comes to our physiological or psychological views and political views and everything. So it starts to establish a great sense of understanding with each of the characters, and we start to really understand what they're all about and become attached to them. Then we go to Doctor Strange. We're introduced to the Time Stone and who Doctor Strange really is. We kind of get a little bit attached. We like Doctor Strange, but it's not like a huge, oh my gosh, he's the most amazing man ever, kind of thing. He's not like a Captain America or Tony Stark, really. But ultimately, he is very important in the MCU, obviously, because he controlled the Time Stone, but eventually it was taken by Thanos. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Now, I know a lot of people say that this is not, this is a movie that you don't even need to see because it literally does nothing to establish any more lore when it comes to, Endgame and all that stuff. Now, this is where I kind of disagree and kind of agree in a way. Now, it doesn't establish any really new lore to what would be coming with Endgame or what happened in Infinity War, except the fact that Nebula really joined their team, and Nebula is a big pivotal key character in this whole conflict, as he's one of the daughters of Thanos as well, and her and Gamora really make up and become a lot closer, and we start to see Gamora and Peter Quill's relationship develop as well, which gives us more of an attachment, an emotional attachment. All these movies that I'm telling you guys, you need to see every single one and watch it up until Endgame, is because of the attachment that we have to a lot of these characters. We don't know what's going to happen in Endgame, and I think the best emotional experience we're going to get from this movie is if we really understand and we really focus on what each of these attachments bring and what they give to us, which we go into with Spider-Man Homecoming. Is where we introduce Peter Parker, and we see the relationship he has with Iron Man, and how that develops in kind of a father-son like relationship as well. So it's very important, and we become attached to that as well, which obviously we're saddened by seeing Spider-Man die at the end of Infinity War. And then we go to Thor Ragnarok. Now this is a good one, because it really gives us an insight to Thor's character and how he was so reliant on Mjolnir, and how it's about drawing your inner power out of you. And he eventually was able to do that by the end of the movie, but it establishes a good relationship with the Hulk / Bruce Banner and Thor, and also introduced us to Korg and Meek, two of my favorite characters, and Valkyrie as well. And we saw Loki, how he developed a much better relationship with his brother throughout the movie as well, which would lead into Infinity War eventually, which is why it was a big pivotal moment. Now Black Panther obviously introduced us to King T'Challa, and him being Black Panther and how that worked. And now we got attached to his character through his perseverance and how his view on everything, and just the backstory that was involved with all that as well. So that was really important. Then we go into Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I'll tell you why I'm not going to Infinity War, even though I know it was released before these. But Ant-Man and the Wasp, where we really start to see a development with Scott Lang and his daughter. So obviously there's some importance there. Same with him and Hank Pym and the Wasp and everything. So this is really important movie overall. It also introduces a lot more lore about the quantum realm, and with him getting stuck in the quantum realm at the end of the movie, obviously that's going to be very important for Endgame. Then we go into Captain Marvel. We're introduced to who is the most powerful Avenger in Captain Marvel, and it gives us more lore on the universe as a whole, and also how she got her power basically from an Infinity Stone. And overall, this is a very important part, because she's apparently going to be a big factor in facing off against Thanos. So obviously we needed to see Captain Marvel and understand and grow with her character as well. Then we get into Infinity War, the final movie to watch before you watch Endgame. And I say Infinity War because you want to go into Endgame understanding the magnitude of what just happened with Infinity War before, to have that emotional experience. Because if you kind of watch Infinity War and then you watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, then Captain Marvel, it kind of dilutes it a little bit, and you kind of are, it's not going to be as a grand experience as if you just walked away from Infinity War, finishing it, going right into Endgame. And there you are, you're picking up where we left off, and here we go. It's time to take action. It's time to get this emotional experience and understand what's going on. So basically all this I'm saying because we want to have the best experience we can emotionally, and psychologically, and to do that we need to understand what each of these characters is going through, and really grasp the lore and the development of all their characters throughout the entire MCU. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and subscribe to me at TrinityGamer333. Leave me a like and a comment, and I will see you guys tomorrow when I talk about when I have the next episode where I kind of give my final thoughts before we go into Endgame. All right, and goodbye.